Welcome to a special edition of One Mind Brainwaves, a weekly forum where we discuss the science surrounding brain health and the mental health challenges many of us are facing in the world today. I'm Hunter Hayes. I'm very happy and grateful to be guest hosting for Brandon Staglin this week. Today's topic is anxiety and depression from trauma. October 10 marks World Mental Health Day, and from a record climate crisis to racial tensions to the devastation of economies and record unemployment, all in the midst of an ongoing pandemic, people all over the world, collectively and individually, are experiencing unprecedented levels of stress. In a few minutes, we'll explore the science behind stress and trauma with a leading researcher in anxiety and depression, Dr. Raphael Rose. We'll also hear from someone who knows firsthand about having to find ways to build resilience. Best-selling author and singer-songwriter Youre joins us. I would like to share a song at the beginning of this. In the conversation of anxiety, it's ironic to me that I get most anxious when I perform, even though that is one of the best parts about what I do. I still have a lot of insecurities around my voice, I just have insecurities galore. And being in front of people while that's the most fulfilling part of what I get to do, it's still something that I deal with nervous energy around. And I wrote this particular song knowing that I was going through a really significant chapter of change in my life, and knowing that I would have to deal with these things, these insecurities, these anxieties, in an ongoing process. I sort of ended my latest record, Wild Blue, with this song because I felt like it was a perfect summation of all the things that I've learned through that change and through that process. Very excited to share it with you. And the song is called Still. So be still. You love to worry, it's okay, you always will. But stay where you are and take the time to take a break and count the stars. There's glory in the mountains that we climb, but stillness brings a peace no search can find. Heart, find rest, and don't feel the need to beat yourself to death. No love with every breath, and don't let the pain paint over all the good that's left. Breaking only shapes the lessons learned. Oh, and the fire you hide inside was born to burn. Oh, fear, my old friend, you scream so loud, the sound of your voice is
everywhere, and then you started fights, and I've let you in. Oh, but it's only weakness if I let you in again. I know that you're afraid to say you're scared of giving up. Oh, but don't you think we've wrestled long enough? Father, I know your truth, and through all the madness, no, I still believe in you. And with all that we've been through, it's only mercy you believe in me too. And with every breath I breathe, you prove to me you do.
Thank you so much for letting me share that song. I'm so excited to be here. I'm so excited to talk with these two guests. I'd like to bring them in right now. Joining us now to discuss anxiety and depression from trauma, Dr. Raphael Rose is a clinical psychologist and researcher at UCLA, where he is Associate Director of the Anxiety and Depression Research Center. He has conducted stress management research with NASA for over a decade, and has private practice in Los Angeles. Dr. Raphael Rose, welcome. Very happy to have you here.
Great to be here. Thanks.
Jewel is a singer-songwriter, actress, writer, philanthropist, and mental health activist who has done so much to help this conversation, to help people who are struggling with these things and need a place to talk about these things, need resources. Viewers, please feel free to post your questions for our guest at any time. Raphael and Jewel, welcome to Brainwaves. Again, I'm so excited to be a part of this conversation. Raphael, let me start with you, if I may. Define trauma, and can I, weird question, but can a whole year or an extended period of time be considered a traumatic event?
Well, first of all, good morning, and I'm excited to be here as well with both of you. Yeah, it's starting off the morning with defining traumas is typically not how I like to start my mornings. But I mean, generally trauma is unfortunately a very common experience for most humans. I mean, it's essentially a sort of a terrible or life-threatening event that people can be exposed to. It can take the shape of many different things, like an accident, a combat event, an assault, abuse, rape, a natural disaster, or a man-made disaster. And so you can see in sort of that broad category of types of events how something like a pandemic certainly could fit into the larger scheme of a trauma. There's really no time limit on a trauma. You know, things like childhood abuse obviously can go on for years, and therefore the time limit isn't necessarily the key component. It's more about our reaction to the trauma. And, you know, fortunately, humans are really resilient when it comes to difficult life events and challenges. So ultimately, sort of our perception or how we process a trauma is what counts in the end. I've since March really been talking about the pandemic as most likely more of what I would call a stressor. Something that is a stressor is basically something that forces us to adapt, whether it's a real event in the world or something we're just thinking about in our minds. And I think it's helpful sometimes to think about stress in two ways. One is an acute stress and chronic stress. And you kind of can tell what those both are. An acute stressor would be something like an exam or a job interview. It's an event that occurs and it's over, and then you resume sort of going back to your life. Whereas a chronic stressor is something that's ongoing and often can go on for a long period of time. It can be things like financial hardship, living in poverty, a chronic medical illness, anything, you know, marital problems. And generally there is no clear end in sight. So I think the pandemic, to that extent, is something that would fit more of that definition. And ultimately, how one copes with that is where all the important information is.
So interesting. So what has your research uncovered about the links between acute or chronic stress and anxiety and depression? What are those sort of connective common threads?
Well, to sort of summarize it is, work I've done and lots of other researchers over the years. When it comes to stress, if you think you handle it well, you handle it well. You do well. You don't have some of the detrimental effects. Detrimental effects associated with stress can be cardiac problems, memory problems, lower immune functioning, aside from the just sort of the distress of the experience. Chronic stressors are the ones that are typically associated with more of those detrimental effects. And the main reason that chronic stress is so challenging is while we are resilient, we also are kind of creatures of habit, and we resort to our old habits. Typically what you're seeing is sort of our primitive versions of ourselves coming out. And that means a return to old behaviors, a return to old habits. Behaviors can be things we do, like drinking or smoking too much or eating too much. I can't wait to see the data on how much ice cream has been consumed, from during the pandemic, to just ways of thinking about ourselves. We associate to younger versions of ourselves, and without real intention to do something differently, chronic stress can sort of take that effect. You sort of think of it as just sort of a weight on ourselves, both our physical and mental beings, that takes a toll over a longer period of time. So the effects of stress in terms of anxiety and depression would be that ongoing stress is more likely to result in anxiety and depression, and I think we're seeing that clearly as a result of the pandemic and all the other events you actually alluded to that have been going on in 2020.
Jewel, you've been very outspoken about having overcome traumatic events in your life, and you've even written about it. Your 2015 memoir, Never Broken, Songs Are Only Half the Story, is a great example. Why is it important to you to share that unvarnished truth of your life, those sort of vulnerable moments, and why is that so important to you?
It's really important to understand that we have a shared experience. Oftentimes with trauma and the things that lead to it, we have this sense that it's only happening to us, and it's the secret world, and shame loves the dark secret worlds. And so to start creating connection, because a lot of coping mechanisms actually limit our ability to connect to other humans. I realized a lot of my coping mechanisms, I was, just for a brief background, my mom left when I was 8. My dad took over raising me and my 2 brothers. He had gone to Vietnam, obviously years earlier. But when he got to Vietnam, it was relaxing. That's how abusive my dad's childhood was. And he didn't realize it was that bad. I mean, obviously it wasn't fun for him. But it was very starkly obvious when he got to Vietnam, and his nervous system relaxed. And so he obviously got another pile of trauma in Vietnam, came back home. My mom left. Here he is raising us, and he started really trauma triggering, but those words weren't really around. We didn't know any of those words. So he started trying to drink to medicate that, and he started repeating the cycle that he was raised by. Actually, he did much better than his dad, but he began to be physically abusive at that age. And so for me, I started being in a ton of pain around age 8. And I watched people, we bar sang. So my dad and I were a duet. So I was singing in bars from a very young age, where I had a front row seat to watching people handle pain. I could tell they were in pain. I saw ways they were dealing with pain, was often drugs and alcohol, rage, relationships, sexuality. And I realized they had this pain, this original wound, and they covered it up, trying to never feel it. But it became a mountain that was insurmountable for them. And often I watch these people die. And so I promised myself that I would figure out what to do with pain. And so I started journaling, and I noticed when I journaled, my pain just went down a little bit. It was tolerable. And that led me on this lifelong journey to try and understand my experience. I moved out very young. I moved out when I was 15 because of the abuse in my house. And I knew that statistically, kids like me end up repeating the cycle. And I didn't want to be a statistic. I called it emotional English. I was aware I was taught an emotional language in my household. and that the words I was given to match feelings didn't always match. I called it emotional dyslexia. So what the word love was given to a million data points of behaviors that my brain pattern matched and called that's love. And when I went out into the world, my brain is going to start pattern matching that. So how do I interfere? How do I disrupt that? If my nurture was so bad, could I ever get to know my real nature? And that was my quest at 15. And what drove me and continues to drive me in my life, again, not knowing what the word trauma was, not knowing what trauma triggering was, I didn't start having panic attacks till I was 15, till I started moving out. Had no idea what was happening to me for many, many, many years. I actually wasn't even told it was trauma and that I was trauma triggering until I was in my mid to late 30s probably. But I started finding ways to help my experience be better, to learn, I didn't know the word triggers, but to learn what situations led to me having those reactions through observation. And it was observation and writing and curiosity that really helped me develop the tools that ultimately did help me rewire. And I want people to know about it. I want people to know they're not alone in those experiences, that we're built to handle stress. We're built to adapt. We are built to evolve. It's not always comfortable, but we are built to do this and to give them practical tools. Because a lot of time we talk about what trauma is, what anxiety is, but what tools can I use to change my life?
That's brilliant. Well, touching on something you just said, and also like in your book, you say that you actually discovered your own identity through writing songs and poetry and different forms of art and expression. What parts of your identity did you learn through those processes? Like in what way?
You know, I remember being in a philosophy class when I was in 8th grade, and there was a philosopher who had a quote, something about happiness. I honestly don't remember what the quote was, but it had to do with our thoughts. And all the kids were reacting around me, and I realized I was hearing other 8th graders regurgitate thoughts that they'd been given by other people. And it made me think of a skin that we wear emotionally, learned behaviors. And so again, that nature versus nurture. How can I get beyond the misunderstandings of my life? How can I get beyond the training of my life and go deeper to understand my nature? And the reason writing is good for that isn't to be a professional writer. I didn't even think that would ever happen. It was so that I could figure out my own thoughts. I call it self and other. When you spend time in quiet, and I was raised in Alaska, so I spent a lot of time in quiet where I could start to get to know that my body was a barometer of how I was doing. My anxiety was actually an ally. And when I started to think of my anxiety as an ally, that the way, if we eat something bad for us, like it's food poisoning, right? Our body, we have a really violent physical reaction and we know never to eat that again. I started to notice my anxiety was trying to teach me what agreed with me and what didn't. So I started keeping meticulous notes of when I had anxiety. I noticed there was only these two basic states. I felt tight and contracted, or I felt dilated and open. And I realized every thought, feeling, or action led to one of those two states. So I started to keep lists in my notebooks of when I felt tight, that was my body's way of telling me something I just thought, did, or felt didn't agree with me. And could I stop engaging in those thoughts, feelings, and actions? And in fact, I learned I could. It took training, myself. It took deliberately creating that habit. But with time, I really learned if I want to stop being anxious, I need to stop doing the things that make me anxious. I need to either change my environment, my thoughts, or my feelings. And that often comes from within.
Wow, that's such a perspective changer for me personally. So this year is the 25th anniversary of your first album, Pieces of You, which it does not feel like 25 years, but to celebrate, you are releasing a special edition next month, which I'm very excited about. Would you be willing to share a song with us?
Yeah, I'd love to. It's the 25th anniversary. I moved to San Diego from Alaska when I was about 18, and when I refused to have sex with a boss, he fired me because I wouldn't sleep with him. And I couldn't pay my rent. He wouldn't give me my paycheck, and it went really, really badly. I started living in my car, and then my car got stolen. I was stealing a lot. And it was when I was in a dressing room trying to steal a dress. I was shoving it down my pants, and I saw myself in the mirror, and I was like, I am a statistic. Like I didn't do what I set out to do at 15, which was not become a statistic. I was homeless and going to end up in jail or dead if I didn't figure something out. And I remember this quote that was attributed to Buddha that said, happiness doesn't depend on who you are, what you have, it depends on what you think. And I wanted to see if I could figure my life out one thought at a time. Could I turn my life around? But because of the amount of high anxiety I had, I couldn't witness my thoughts in real time. So I thought I would start watching my hands, because they're the servants of your thought. It's your thought cooled down into action. So my huge life plan was stop stealing and write everything my hands did for 2 weeks, which is a pretty ridiculous life plan. But an amazing side effect happened at the end of that 2 weeks. My anxiety went down so much. It was shocking. It was like the most amazing side effect. And it was because I started learning about presence, basically. The word mindfulness, I don't think was around then. But it caused me to start to experiment more, again, with that body barometer of like, what makes me feel dilated and open? What makes me feel contracted? And one of the biggest things I learned were these two basic states of being, and that you can't be in two states at once. So if I was really anxious, figure out what I was thinking, feeling, or doing. But could I actually hack my way into a dilated state by choosing something off my list that caused me to relax? So joy, gratitude, observation, curiosity, being in nature, all these things made my system dilate. And so one day I was about to head into a panic attack. I started to get to where I could feel them ramping up before it happened. And I was like, I'm going to double down on gratitude. And so I was sitting there homeless on a street corner, wondering what on earth I feel like I have to be grateful for. But I saw the sun coming through this tree, and it was beautiful. And it reminded me of being in Alaska and these meadows and that same experience. And I was moved to tears, and my whole system relaxed. And as I know Rafe would probably understand much better than me, it's physiological. Our blood pressure lowers because our vascular system dilates. The blood pattern flow changes in our brain. Neurotransmitters change. And it's all because of gratitude. So even though it is my 25th anniversary, I actually want to play a brand new song that I wrote about that experience. And I'll do a really short version. But this is a new song called Grateful.
When everything's wrong, when I can't find my song, when darkness is all I see, there is a remedy. It's all the little things that make the world go round. It's all the little things that are most powerful. There's no politician, no sky to die, 'cause no one can take the love from my heart. And the sun gonna shine in this heart of mine. The sun gonna shine in this heart of mine. The sun gonna shine, ooh, it's true. 'Cause I can always be grateful in the loudest sound. It's your own life crashing down. When your friends, they don't come around, there's one true thing I found. The sun gonna shine in this heart of mine. The sun gonna shine in this heart of mine. The sun gonna shine, ooh, it's true. 'Cause I can always be grateful. So bring it on, bring it on, bring it on, bring it on now. Bring it on, bring it on, bring it on, bring it on now. 'Cause I'm singing on, I'm singing on, I'm singing on now. I'm singing on, I'm singing on, singing on. 'Cause the sun gonna shine in this heart of mine. The sun gonna shine in this heart of mine. The sun gonna shine, ooh, it's true. 'Cause I can always be grateful.
And the studio audience goes wild.
Thank you.
That was fantastic. Wow. Love that song. Thank you so much for sharing that. And thank you so much for sharing the story behind it too. That's always my favorite part, personally. Hearing about that. Switching gears for a second. Doctor, can I call you Doc? I've always wanted to say that, and I've never been able to get away with it. So I felt like I maybe could get away with it in this. Studies have shown that music and art can have strong therapeutic effects, even, helping to relieve pain. What are some of the other ways that people can maintain and or build mental resilience, especially now during this time of, everything that's happening around us?
Yeah. How we build resilience is still one of the big questions where everyone's kind of trying to work on. I think that, being here with two incredibly talented songwriters gives us a little bit of an indication what does really help. So we do know a lot about what makes up resilient individuals, which is a separate question than whether or not we know how to train someone to be resilient. But, two of the things you do in songwriting, one of the things that's been out in the research for decades is journaling. Writing about stressors, writing about challenging life events is incredibly therapeutic to the extent that you both do it in a way that also brings meaning to your day-to-day life. I think gives us a real good insight into ways that we can become resilient. And I think pursuing meaning is really an important part of that. And that's obviously a very subjective experience. What is meaningful to you or to Jewel, to anyone else, is going to differ for each person. But, I think getting on a path to doing that is really important. Whenever I'm talking, I always love to try to define things, and stress and resilience are two of the most commonly used words, and nobody seems to agree as to how we define them. I generally think of resilience as rebounding and recovering from life's stressors. So it's not that you don't have stress, you actually do, and you want to actually have stress because I think that's where the learning comes from. But you focus on rebounding and recovering. So you sort of think of having a reaction to the stressor and then you rebound and recover. The idea is that the rebound and recovery is going to lead to growth and meaning in your life. Other things we know about resilient individuals are that they are socially connected. Social connection is not the same as social contact. So I think a lot of people have been having social contact since the pandemic through texting or video chatting, but that's not the same as connecting. And I think that's something I've been talking a lot about. It's when someone says, "How are you?" and you say, "Fine," it's okay to talk about things not being fine. And if ever there was a time to talk about how things are not fine, it seems like it's right now. So social connection is important. People who are resilient generally view stressors as challenges. They're actually interested in facing them. And they do so with intention. They don't avoid it necessarily. And as I said earlier, I think that resilient individuals basically think they can handle stress well. That perception probably comes from everything we've just been talking about, that if they're leading more meaningful lives or pursuing more meaning, socially connected, have maybe a sense of spirituality, whatever that means for that individual, they're more likely to have positive affect. And positive affect simply means more joy, more pleasure, more positive emotions. And we know resilient people tend to experience more of that as well. So it's not just that they're, I think, magically connected. I think the important points that Jill was saying about nature versus nurture, we can't do a ton about nature at this point, unless you guys have some secrets I don't know about, but we can do a lot about what we learn and how we learn to do things. And I think that's the real optimistic message for even something like a pandemic. I think there's a great opportunity for people to learn about themselves and to actually come out of this in a stronger, more self-aware place where they've developed ways of coping that can promote growth, even though it may be really challenging and frustrating, and there may be ups and downs along the way, of course.
Yeah, I would love to, piggyback on some of that. I love what you're saying. For me, I think of resilience as multiple skill sets and tools that we grow and develop over time. I look at what I think are resilient systems, and I always, again, look at nature, I guess because I was raised in Alaska. But a resilient ecosystem is biodiverse. It has to have multiple things in its, sphere to be able to handle drought one season and flood the next. And when it has enough different diverse life forms, it's a resilient system. It's going to stand the test of nature. Nature is incredibly resilient. And so in studying that when I was young and wondering how am I going to make it through my life, I realized learning. I have to learn as many things as I can so that I can have as many tools in my system. So that if what's required of me is being in isolation during COVID, I have skills around that. I like being alone. I've already built up a skill set around that. If I didn't have that prior to now, this is my opportunity to learn how to get that skill set. Our stress systems are kind of like immune systems. We have to give them a workout. I've been teaching my 9-year-old son to ride a bike, and it is the most stressful thing he's ever done. And he's pinging on an 11 on his stress chart. And helping him do it, his brain starts adapting and starts adjusting and realizing this isn't the most stressful thing. And that just raised his roof up. And then we're going to keep kind of building his stress immune system so that it keeps realizing I'm built to do this, I'm built to adapt, and he's gaining these skill systems. And I think that's, I have this youth foundation for 18 years. We work with suicidal kids, often multiple suicide attempts by the time they get to us. And really helping them realize we're built to adapt. All of us are going to have pain in our lives. None of us get through life without having our heart broken in some way. It's what we do with those pieces that make us extraordinary. It is our gift. And to get excited and curious about that, how am I going to put these things together that's going to end up being my special superpower? And without fail, I've seen each one of these kids over the last almost 2 decades find ways to convert, if we can let go of the anger and let go of the grudges and those things, to start to convert these things into whatever beauty their life is going to become. And with COVID, I have a saying, I hate to waste a good tragedy. If you're going to have a tragedy, you might as well maximize your growth out of it. And I think with the COVID, I'm really seeing the entire world, cultures, nations, as well as individuals, look at 2 paths. I think we're either going to introspect, let go of, it's 4 steps in my mind. We're going to introspect, let go of old thoughts, systems, and beliefs that no longer serve us, adopt new ones, and if we create an actionable plan and act on that, we have wisdom. Or the shadow side of that is we're going to suppress, we're going to cling to old thoughts, beliefs and systems and fear. We're going to feel disempowered, and then we're going to doubt every decision. And so I think being as intentional as you can about which of those 4 steps do I want to go through a crisis with? Because every crisis will require one of those 2 pathways of you. And while the first pathway isn't really comfortable, right? Introspection, death, basically letting go of things, rebirth, finding new things, and wisdom. It isn't comfortable, but it's what we're built to do. It is how we evolve, and we are built to evolve.
So, and in connection with that, and also touching on something you've already talked about, you're a big proponent of meditation, and you talk about it a lot. You've already spoken about it here. How specifically, what does it do for you? How does it help with anxiety?
I look at, Rafe would probably be, much more qualified to answer this, but we have seen through studies that you can start to grow gray matter in as little as, I think, 8 weeks on one study I read. You can start to grow new folds in your frontal lobes and start to shrink areas where anxiety lives, which is extraordinary. I look at it as a 2-phase process. My meditation builds my ability to be present. We have to be present to create change. So my anxiety and my worry, all my future thinking of worrying and being hypervigilant, right? I was a child of abuse. We learn to be hypervigilant, try to see where the next problem's going to come from. But it takes me out of, and I'm doing it to keep myself safe, but ironically, it takes me out of the only opportunity I have to keep myself safe, which is right now. The only place I can keep myself truly safe is being here right now. My anxiety and my worry rob me of that opportunity. So meditation helps me build the muscle to be present. It builds the length and duration that I'm able to be present, because how often are we present in our lives? Not very often. Even when I'm brushing my teeth, I'm walking around the house doing other things. So meditation for me does that, and it does help rewire our brain, which I know Dr. Rafe can talk much more about. But for me, I don't think that's enough to change your life. It isn't enough to change your habits. It's just the prerequisite. You have to be present to change your life. And I am interested in change. So it's what I call mindfulness in motion. Now that I've done the workout and the bicep curl, I want to put that muscle to work. And that's where developing practicable exercises that help me rewire habits became really critical and really fun with time. At first, it was just very painful looking at what I called a triad, a reaction, a stimulus, a reaction, and a reward. They call it a habit loop. I didn't know that at the time. But you can start to rewire these. I was stealing, and so that was the first habit loop I started attacking when I was 18. And I couldn't change my stimulus. It was being homeless, and that was a complicated thing to get out of. But my response was stealing. My reward was I felt powerful and in control. And so I stopped stealing and I started writing. And I wrote a lot because I stole a lot. And it felt terrible for weeks to do it. And it didn't feel rewarding to write. But with time, I began to get a reward out of writing. And it was also a much more like dilating experience. And it became a career, which was bizarre. But for me, it's those two things. Meditation does help us, in a million ways. And then it's also putting that to use. Because with mindfulness, you want to create a gap between perceiving a thought and acting on a thought, right? Before you act on that thought, you have this gap, and that's where you insert new tools, new thoughts, new information to be able to change behaviors. So you're not on the cycle that Dr. Rose spoke about earlier of reverting to old selves and old patterns.
Dr. Rafe, I would love to also hear your
Sure.
take on that.
Well, listen, it seems that my presence isn't really required here. If you're going to call anyone Doc, it should be Doc Jewel at this point. She nailed everything, literally, the research, and the whole tool set idea, and the idea that, I think mindfulness is really sort of more of a quality of approaching life. And then what needs to come after that is the behavior change. So, unfortunately, I have very little to add to that. I would say that what seems to happen in mindfulness is it does tend to deregulate or downregulate the emotional center of the brain. So if you think of emotional center of the brain, this is very basic neuroscience, so don't hold me to it. The amygdala is sort of this very small area in the center of the brain, more of a primitive area of the brain. If you think of the brain as developing from the back to the front, our most recent advances are our frontal cortex. When people are anxious or depressed or have those kinds of emotions, the amygdala on brain imaging scans lights up. It's very active. When people practice mindfulness, or even they do the type of therapy that I do with people called cognitive behavioral therapy, it's a process of really sort of identifying, labeling, being aware non-judgmentally of emotions. So it's, sort of the difference between I'm an anxious mess and I'm, defective versus I'm a person who's having a threatening or scary thought about my health or my child. I'm feeling symptoms of heart racing or palpitations or tension in my body. It's a real difference between saying I'm an anxious person and I'm a person who's having an anxious experience. And it's that process that seems to activate more of the left frontal cortex, which is an area that we have thinking, processing, executive functioning, allows us to essentially be human in the good ways that we can be human. And when that part of the brain acts up or lights up and brain imaging scans, the emotional center actually quiets down. So that's sort of a profound sort of finding that you can see in people who practice mindfulness and do other types of behavioral health approaches that are in line with that. And if you think of anxiety or stress, specifically more intense versions of it, as kind of hijacking your brain, you could see how beneficial that would be. It is literally the ability to kind of like step back and see, oh, I see what's going on. And if you can't even see what's going on, how can you do anything about it? So the idea that you can see that then I think gives you more options to implement your tool set of skills that can then be put into play. And that is just a really optimistic sort of scenario and template for moving forward. So mindfulness is something I teach almost all my clients now, and Jules seems like she was on it really early on. It has something that's become more popular in behavioral health starting in the mid-90s, but it has become very popular. And the reason it's become very popular is it works. There's research behind it, which is just such a great benefit to it. I think that I often introduce people to mindfulness in teaching them mindlessness at first. And I laughed when Jill talked about brushing her teeth. That was the first mindful activity I attempted to do when I took a mindfulness course years ago, which is 3 minutes, right? If you're doing it properly, you brush your teeth for 3 minutes. And I tried to pay attention to it. And all I realized I was doing is I was paying attention to what just happened before or where I had to be next, but not right at that moment. So it's a great exercise to actually bring in and introduce the idea of mindfulness, primarily probably because it will alert you to some ways that you're not mindful and not present. And it's a very tactile experience. And that's, to me, the way to go about behavior change is introduce it gradually. 3 minutes, 4 minutes, 5 minutes of doing something different. And in that way, I start to try to help people think about things that would go on and be sustainable. And it's much easier to start to develop something that ultimately becomes sustainable if you start it for 3 or 4 or 5 minutes rather than, okay, I got to go run for an hour and I got to change everything about my behavior. So this sort of gradual approach of being more aware and then incrementally changing things you do is really a way I think that well, I think this goes beyond your question to me, but thinking about behavior change gets me excited. So there we go.
I discovered, with that hands thing I did, that was me learning to be present enough to watch my hands. And then you learn, I think stairs was maybe my next one. Every time I walked upstairs, I would ask myself just to be really present about, I feel my right foot and I feel my left foot. So if anybody's wondering, because mindfulness is this catch-all phrase, you must get asked about it all the time, Dr. Rose. I just define mindfulness as conscious presence. That's it. You can be consciously present when you meditate. You can be consciously present when you're walking up the stairs, and those simple things, just doing it every time I wash my hands, for instance. And then you learn to kind of grow that out. And I think I mentioned I read a lot of philosophy when I was young, and Descartes said, I think, therefore I am. But I realized when I was homeless, I perceive what I think, therefore I am. I'm not my thoughts. I'm the observer of them. Right. So if I can perceive I'm sad, I'm something other than sad. I'm the observer of it. And a lot of times we over-identify with our brain. If our body was a car, our brain is not the driver, it's the steering wheel. And I spent most of my young life not knowing that. And when I was 18 and realized, wait a minute, the observer is the driver. And what mindfulness does, being consciously present, it puts you in the driver's seat. Otherwise, your car will go on autopilot and your brain will neurologically do what it was wired to do and be on autopilot. And so with mindfulness, it's this attitude toward life of learning to be observant and curious in real time, realizing not every thought and feeling is a fact. You can curate your thoughts. We curate everything else. We curate what we eat and what we wear. Our best use of time would be to curate what we think. Was that scary thought I just had a fact? What other thought could I have right now? And use my creativity instead of to scare myself, but now use my creativity to think of other options to insert in that gap.
Yeah. And we often use the term cognitive flexibility to describe, I think, what Jewel is talking about. So it's spot on to be aware. I do think that, be in the moment or be present is one of those terms that's been around forever, but I think it's really unhelpful to just say that to someone as opposed to teach them how they can do it. And I think mindfulness provides you that path. One of the mindfulness exercises I do with clients is something called a body scan. And a body scan is simply just sitting and noticing different parts of your body. So what it actually does is train you to be more aware, more conscious, and you do so without judgment. You feel whatever you're feeling in your feet, your toes, your knees. And it's sometimes awkward for people to do, but it actually does provide them a way to understand, oh, this is sitting with myself. This is just noticing what I'm thinking or feeling. And I think that there's a whole host of resources out there that are really beneficial and I think easy. And that's the great news that it is so much more accessible now for people to start to learn this. And I think a real positive sign in that way.
This is so brilliant. I'm learning so much. I was honestly anxious when this started, and I feel so much better about myself and my life. I'm probably going to reference this video for a long time. And I'm so grateful for you guys. Dr. Rafe, to one extent or another, we've all been significantly changed by this year in the events. And I guess my question now would be, what do you see as some of the biggest mental health challenges ahead? What's next?
Well, I mean, I think Jules says she has an 8-year-old, or she probably can speak to the challenge. The number one challenge is there are a whole host of kids who have not been in school for a year. I have a 2-year-old. He doesn't know what the hell's going on, so he's fine. He's happy. But if you have older kids, that's I think the big challenge. I mean, I think ultimately what COVID has done is it's exposed everything that is essentially kind of not working. And that starts with mental health and doesn't end there, of course. So, I think the issues that services aren't, available to enough people, especially underserved populations. Technology, therefore, provides a great opportunity for sort of spreading the word of things that are evidence-based, which is what we call things like mindfulness and cognitive behavioral therapy, for people to help with anxiety and depression. Generally, what COVID's done is if you had some anxiety or depression before, it's likely made it worse. And if you haven't had it, it's possible it's kind of brought you into contact with things that are more related to worry and sadness. There's the immediate sort of getting through this. And I think that's the name of the game right now is survive. My hope is that people don't develop too many bad habits. I'm monitoring any of my clients who started to drink a little bit more, or eat a little bit more. And we're like, yeah, I get why that's happening. Let's just make sure we're keeping it under control, and that when this ends, and we're still looking at another 6 months probably, that we are able to address those people who are having some difficulty adjusting. So I think it's I don't think we're going to know at this point, and my sense is we're going to know much more over the ensuing years. There's probably going to be a decent amount and significant kind of impact on people, but my concern are people who are isolated already are going to be more isolated. People who have some sort of mental health or behavioral health challenge are going to feel that worse. Thinking about some of our, senior citizens and older people, there's just so many different ways that this has impacted people. So until we know specifically who we need to address more in the future, general approach of compassion and hopefully making mental health more of a priority and importance. And I am hopeful in that. I actually am seeing that. I mean, this show is obviously an example of that, but generally it just seems like people are talking more about the importance of that. And I think that's really ultimately going to be really helpful for the field.
With me, I really feel, looking forward at what we're facing, I think COVID has exacerbated a problem we were already having. I mean, since 2007 to 2018, suicide rates went up almost 60% in age groups between, 10 to 24. And across almost every demographic, and that was pre-pandemic. And during an economic recession, suicide rates tend to nearly double. And we've never had an economic depression during a pandemic, during isolation. So I really see this pandemic as threefold. It's the virus, it's an economic outfall, and it's going to be a mental health outfall. And when you look at just the raw numbers, it's very possible that we could lose more people to mental health issues than the actual virus. And so shows like this, I think, are really important, creating scalable digital tools that people can practice at home. I love all the Zoom therapy that's able to happen. But during COVID, crisis hotlines went up 800%. Only 41% of the people are reporting getting help for their mental health issues during this time. So to me, that's really where I see the problem. But again, I feel like I saw this happening, as I'm sure Dr. Rose did prior to COVID, with what Dr. Rose mentioned earlier of a connection versus, how did you say it, Dr. Rose? It was a nice differentiation.
The difference between social contact versus social connection?
Yeah, I think we were struggling with that prior. We've been a more connected society thanks to the internet for, decades now. But we're not a more connected, I didn't word it right like you did, I'm so sorry. But we're in contact with each other, but we're not having a deep, nourishing sense of connection. And that was happening pre-pandemic. And I think the pandemic is exposing that. And if I could encourage everybody listening to walk away with one thing, I want you to ask yourself as homework is, I want you to ask what nourishes you. And I don't mean food, although often we choose food when we're trying to nourish ourselves emotionally. What nourishes you? What makes you feel deeply connected? It can be that sense of purpose. It could be realizing, oh my gosh, my job doesn't give me that. What will I do about it? It could be my friendships aren't deeply nourishing. But but identify those things that really, really nourish you, that connect you to yourself and to other people, because I really feel that deep sense of connection is a cure in and of itself that can start to relieve a lot of other pain points.
Jewel, on Saturday, October 10th, you are hosting a free live stream event, the Wellness Experience. I'm very excited about that. How do we find that? How do we tune in? Where can we see it?
Yeah, you can go to, I'm trying to think of the website. I'm so bad. I'm trying to see if I have it in my notes. I'm pretty awful that way. I'm a typical artist. I want to say it's the wellnessexperience.com, but just Google Jewel's Wellness Experience or go to my website, jeweljk.com. I have this theory about a whole human. You know, I was not taught in school all the skills I needed to be able to be a whole person. So if you look at it like fitness, a lot of us, I was raised in a musical family. So my musical fitness, that limb was just very buff and very strong by a young age. But my intimacy fitness, my emotional health fitness, all those areas were very atrophied. And I've never used my celebrity to get a table at a restaurant. I've used my celebrity to gain access to experts, people that I think can teach me what I need to know, because I want to know how to have tone in these other areas, because otherwise we don't have harmony. You know, we have an imbalance that creates pain. So the Wellness Experience is basically taking all the years that I've been studying and helping democratize it for other people, where they can get physical fitness, mental health fitness, emotional fitness, medical fitness, all available to them for free. So it's on Saturday the 10th, World Mental Health Day, and you can go to thewellnessexperience.com, I think, or Google Jewel and find my website. I don't know.
That's amazing. Thank you so much for using your platform to share those things. I think that's absolutely tremendous. I guess in sort of closing to both of you, what words of hope do you have for those who might be really struggling to manage anxiety or depression right now? Because there is hope, there is positive. We've talked about these things already in this conversation. I guess what would you like to sort of leave everybody with? What message of hope would you like to wrap this up with?
You know, I think that the hopeful message out there is that you're not alone. I mean, if there ever was a time where everyone's suffering and dealing with things, it's now. That doesn't minimize anyone's experience or validate someone else's more. It's just, you're truly not alone, and everyone's having a hard time. Everyone's challenged. I think things are taking longer. Things are more frustrating. Everyone's sort of less optimal in a lot of ways, and obviously there are some people who are really suffering through this. The hope, therefore, is that you will reach out and you can, in fact, connect with others, and there are resources that can help. Whether it's sadness, despair, along the lines of thinking of hurting yourself, or just a real level of stress and anxiety. And I think there are resources that can help. There are things you can do for yourself that will be helpful, being more compassionate, sort of approaching life, I think, with a little bit more intention, and trying to find meaning amidst all of this. And just really, you got to be creative. If you can't go out to dinner and you can't go to a movie theater, you cook, or you have people over in your backyard, or you watch a video or a movie together in some way and share that experience somehow. There are creative ways that people, I think, can remain connected. And to do that, I think you really have to radically accept the reality that we're dealing with right now. And this sort of idea of radical acceptance means you don't have to like what's going on. I mean, I don't, but start with that point. And then I think it makes adapting to what we're facing now a little bit easier. And I think, as we've said, and as Jewel talked about, you can't get stronger without facing adversity. So hopefully you will be able to view, the adversity that you face in different ways in your life as an opportunity for growth and an opportunity to get better. And think of it not as just we're getting through 2020. We do want to get through 2020, but it's more of a lifelong pursuit. And I think that thinking of it as a long-term game that we can get better at incrementally, gradually. And therefore, if you're going to change something in your life, you're going to add a new hobby, you're going to take care of yourself differently, do it slowly and gradually. That's going to last. The 5-minute rule is something many of us have heard. We can do anything, whether it's walking or writing, or anything that's good for us for 5 minutes. And hopefully then it will start to sort of sink in and internalize, and at some point, become something that we do more regularly. But each day, just try to do something, one thing that's good for you. And my hope is that, we're going to get through this in a better place ultimately.
For me, I think, looking forward, nothing is forever. And that's the good and bad news. And that has got me through so many times in my life. Again, because I grew up in nature, I'd watch the tide go out on the bay where I lived. And sometimes the tide is just out, but it always comes back in. So no matter how depressed or scary or frightening or intense an experience I was in is, it always changes. And you just have to keep breathing, because it will change. Nothing is static, nothing is forever. And when we're in these deeply depressed or entrenched states, we can tend to be very absolute and think it's forever and it won't ever stop feeling that way. And so that would be just maybe my first thing. And the other is, even if there's a tremendous resilience inside each one of us. And when you will spend some time with yourself, you might find ways of adapting for yourself that nobody ever would have even thought of but you. And everybody has that ability. And so not to be afraid to really sit and go in when you're feeling at your worst and ask yourself some simple questions. What do I need right now? And you probably will hear an answer. And it's probably an answer only you will get to hear and know better than anybody else. And you are your own best expert in some of those ways. So even if I definitely encourage people to reach out, talk to friends, connect, talk to professionals, but also connect to yourself, because we spend so much time developing those other relationships when this is the relationship that will most radically change your life. And then don't waste a good tragedy. Like Dr. Rose said, this time is upon us. Peace is not the absence of something. It's the willingness to come into harmony with what is. We can't find peace by trying to get rid of stressful situations. We can only find peace through this active inner willingness to come into harmony with the truth of a moment. That puts us in a position to say, now what does this moment need to help change it? And that's one of the most powerful things we can do.
That's great advice. Great words. Thank you both so much. And to everybody watching, thank you so much for watching. You can also post questions on onemind.org/brainwaves. And remember, if you or someone you care about are feeling overwhelmed with emotions like sadness, depression, or anxiety, the Disaster Distress Hotline provides 24/7, 365 crisis counseling. It's 1-800-985-5990, or text "Talk with Us" to 66746 to connect with a trained crisis counselor. And remember, please share this with anybody you know that might benefit from seeing this, from hearing all this. I know I myself have benefited significantly, so I'm very grateful for this opportunity to guest host. Thank you so much for joining us. Both of you, Jewel, Dr. Raphael, thank you so much for being here and sharing what you've shared, and and just being there for everybody in the way that you have, and sharing your experiences so openly. We sincerely appreciate it. And I guess we'll close with that. Thanks for watching. Thanks for joining, and be good to everybody.
Mental health is stepping out of the shadows and into the spotlight.
I think I need help.
Can you talk?
Struggling.
I'm here.
Depressed. Can't sleep.
But we need the science and solutions to change lives. Now, more than ever, we are in this fight together. We are of one mind, accelerating brain health for all. Help us fund new treatments at onemind.org.